Welcome back to the Total Confidence Podcast. Very excited. We're keeping season 3 rolling with a special guest I'm super excited to speak with. Micky ScottBey Jones is our guest. Her pronouns she and her. And I'll read from her about page and then we'll get into it. And I love this. She said, "Hey y'all, I'm Micky ScottBey. She, her pronouns. I used to be a birth doula. I am now known as the Justice Doula, which means I accompany people as they birth non-human precious things into the world like love, empathy, self-compassion, liberation, healing, and resilience. My work with you is about accompaniment, being a caring companion, a witness to your struggle, a curious co-learner, a gentle, firm voice asking you what you want and reminding you of the wisdom you have inside and the resources you have for more growth and resilience." She goes on to say, "I am not a brand. I am a person, and who I am, including the mistakes I've made and lessons I've learned, are intertwined with how I build relationships, work, teach, facilitate, and coach. I am committed to the flourishing of the people of the global majority of those historically targeted by colonization, patriarchy, homophobia, xenophobia, and all the isms. Because these things cause suffering for all, and I want liberation for us all, I work with and support all who are committed to individual and social transformation, healing, and change. We must all heal our wounds and do our work. I am not your average coach or facilitator, but if this resonates with you, you're not average either. Let's work together." Welcome to Total Confidence Podcast, Micky ScottBey Jones.
Well, look at that. I hadn't heard that in a while.
Fascinating. How you feeling?
Pretty good. It's a sunny day, which I love. The sun really helps me survive. I'm like a little plant. I just need to get out in the sun. So feeling good in this moment. How about you today?
I'm well. Excited to speak with you. So, where are you from originally?
Um, I mean, that's it should be an easy question, right? But like I immediately go to like all the streams that made me. But I was born in Toledo, Ohio,
Okay.
to two parents who were actually from uh, Montclair slash Newark, New Jersey. Um, and then about the age of 8, I moved from Toledo with my mother to Knoxville, Tennessee, and spent the rest of my years in Tennessee.
So, let's start with Toledo. How did Toledo shape your view of the world, and then go into Knoxville and those two contrasting
Yeah,
places, and what impact did that move have on you?
yeah. Well, I was so little in Toledo. I think, but up to 8 years old, you're still basically your world is your parents and your family and your neighborhood, your school. And I was a Catholic school kid, first through third, and so I went to Catholic school and had actually a really great experience. Um, I had a nun as a teacher, but she was very kind in my memory. I don't remember her being mean. Um, I'm not Catholic. I wasn't raised Catholic, so I was an outsider in Catholic school. So there were definitely things about that spiritually and just in the other ways I was an outsider. It was a mostly white school. I was a little black girl. Um, but I remember these large families and just how it felt like the big kids would kind of were like big sisters and brothers to all of us kids. So that really shaped me. Also, I was drawn, I think, to the spiritual, to the religious in that environment because they had such a cohesive community. And I wanted that spirituality for myself. And I asked my mom if I could be baptized as a little 8-year-old because they were having first communion, right? I wanted my
Mhm.
own ceremony, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that was the beginning of like me seeking this spiritual journey for myself. I didn't know what all that meant, but I wanted something. And I also had kind of a typical, maybe Midwest childhood in that I lived in the houses. My parents were very firmly middle class. Then there were townhomes and there were apartments, and I could ride my bike past all of those to the 7-Eleven, and we could play in the playground. And you had people mixing from the houses and the townhouses and the apartments because we had one playground. Um, and so really that kind of childhood where it was kind of middle class and working class mixed, um, which is, I don't know how common that is, but that's just how it was, you know? And I have thankfully always had kind of a mixed group of people that I've been around, class wise, religion wise, racially. And so I think that did form me as a child. My mother was also a college administrator, so I grew up on college campuses. So in Knoxville specifically, I spent a lot of time on campus with her. I grew up on the UT Knoxville campus, and she was the director of Disabled Student Services. So I grew up around people who were permanently or temporarily disabled, a lot of deaf students. So I knew what sign language was. I knew what accommodations were. I didn't know those words, right? I didn't know what an accommodation was, but I could see it. And so in my mom's office, she had a secretary that was a woman, and she was the head of the office, and she was a woman. So I grew up with that kind of environment. And so I think that those kinds of things shaped me being in a university town where I had friends that were all kinds of different people. I grew up with, like I said, Catholic kids, both in both places, and Jewish kids and Lutheran kids. And like I had friends of all different religions and beliefs, and I spent a lot of times at their houses. And so I'd end up at Catholic mass with those friends. I'd end up in Jewish temple with those friends, or over for the holidays. I had some Muslim friends here and there, and did get to be with them some. And I had lots of Christian friends, of course, of different denominations outside of Catholicism. And so I had those experiences too. And even though I eventually landed on my own kind of spiritual journey, I was always around that difference that I think never allowed me to kind of fully get stuck in one way of belief, which I'm deeply thankful for.
That is a blessing. I just had a conversation with my daughter about that, about expanding your circles and not just getting stuck in, just one particular group of people with one particular mindset. So that is a blessing. I can do that. You went to college for consumer and family sciences?
Yes.
What inspired that path? And how did that how has that training or how does this training help you with the work you do today?
Yeah, I'm laughing because we used to our building was across the street from the rest of the campus. I think it still is. I went to Middle Tennessee State University. And so we jokingly called it the girly building because it's like human sciences. It was nutrition and child development, early childhood ed, right? So most of the people taking classes in that building were women, because those are very feminized careers, right? Yeah, you occasionally meet the male preschool teacher, or the non-binary preschool teacher, but a lot of times when you think of a preschool teacher, you think of a young woman.
Yeah.
And I had grown up in the YMCA and came through a leadership program called Leaders Club, and grew up going to Blue Ridge Leader School every year. And so I saw myself continuing in that kind of working with families and communities, and consumer and family sciences felt like the next logical step. I actually came into school. The reason I kind of wanted to come to Nashville is because, like a lot of people, I wanted to get into the music industry. So my original major had been music business. And I went ahead and I actually became involved in the music business so quickly when I moved to Nashville that I switched and had that as my minor. and consumer and family sciences as my major,
Mm-hmm.
as kind of, let me get my degree in the thing that's my fallback plan if I don't end up in the music biz. And spoiler alert, I did not end up in the music business very long.
Mm-hmm.
I started having children after I got married very young and had kids. And at the time, I was a backup dancer in
Yeah.
the Christian music industry. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Uh, that's a whole thing, whole nother side of my life. And my husband at the time was a radio DJ. And so I ended up staying home, mostly doing some work here and there, doing some, that's kind of how I started getting into nonprofit work, which I've been doing for over 20 years. And did a little, about a 10-year stint in mother baby care.
Mm.
I was a doula, childbirth educator, lactation consultant. But even through that, doing some nonprofit work and activism, like activism's always been a stream in my life, but I didn't know it was called activism for a long time. I didn't know that's what I was doing, when I was advocating for home birth or water birth or just more choices for you to have a doula by your side. I didn't know that's what that was, right? I
Mm-hmm.
just was doing that because I wanted it and I wanted it to be available for other families. Um, and so, at every phase, every part of my life, I've kind of been learning who I am, and I still am.
I was just like blown away on like some of the things on your journey and just how it all connects. And then you started studying theology.
Yeah. So 14 years after I went to undergrad, I went back to school,
Okay.
and decided to do a theology degree. Um, and I was already kind of burning out with the mother baby care. My children were getting older. Um, and I was trying to decide if I was going to go further into healthcare because I
Mm-hmm.
was doing that mother baby care, or if I was going to do something else. My other big love had always, since that little girl who wanted to get baptized, because her friends were all having first communion, I
Mm-hmm.
had been drawn to the spiritual. Um, and I had gone through my own spiritual kind of awakening as a teenager, and got really involved in the evangelical church, which I'm not a part of anymore, but that was a big part of my life. And I'd always been interested in kind of how we talk about God, how we talk about the spirit. And I ended up making that decision to go and study theology, and did an MDiv program at first, but because I wanted to learn with a particular teacher. His name is Dr. Randy Woodley, and he's the indigenous Cherokee man who lives in Oregon. And he and his wife Edith are mentors of mine, and I learned I could study with Randy and with other Indigenous people full time through a thing called NATES, North American Institute for Indigenous Theological Studies. And that's how I ended up with NATES and and ended up now then doing a master's of intercultural studies. And so we have we have like a practice community. Like NATES is not just school. It was designed for the Indigenous student, but it's also a community of practice. Um, it's a place where I feel like I can always go home. And so that's where I got my theological teaching. And it was really important to me as a Black woman who is not a settler on this land, but also has a responsibility to the original people of this land. And who, through the complicated story of what it means to be someone whose ancestry intertwines with slavery on this continent, does have settler blood inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to learn from Indigenous people and with Indigenous people, so that's why I did that. I brought a womanist lens and with this Indigenous lens, and that's how I did my theological training. And so that and it was it basically happened around the same time as Ferguson. So I was having
Oh,
this deep awakening
wow.
about
Wow. Wow.
So my whole world was rocked because of Trayvon Martin a few years before that, right? And then I started seminary I think 2012 or 13. So like right when Ferguson popped off. So that was also a big stream that was happening during my theological training, but it also then immediately became part of my work. Um, and so, it's for the last like 6 or 7 years, my work has really been around supporting change makers, like supporting the folks, taking this doula, you know, work of supporting people into supporting those who are trying to lead in their communities, who are activists, organizers, clergy, anybody who says I want to be part of the change, to bring more freedom, more liberation, more peace, all of those things into this world that we're all trying to figure out.
I've heard this. This is the first time I heard, as I was studying you to come on before coming on, womanist theology.
Yeah.
Womanist theology. If you don't mind expounding on it.
Yeah. When I first heard about womanist theology, it was like finding home. And it was like finding home inside my own body. Um, and, um, I think a lot of time when we think about like how we talk about God language, religious language, faith stuff, like how we think about things, um, like for a long time, I just thought, I thought there was one Christianity. Like I just thought all Christians believe the same thing. I truly didn't know there was a study of how we understand what we believe or how we understand scripture, that there was, I had maybe some slight understanding of philosophy, but not theology, right? As like a study and a way of examining our beliefs. And then when I did start to learn about it, I'm learning mostly like what we just call theology, which is white male theology. Like they're the ones who don't get a qualifier, right? So we have queer theology, we have womanist theology, we have I don't know, we do have Black liberation theology, and Black liberation theology kind of came first. Womanist theology is kind of the Black woman's answer to Black liberation theology.
Okay.
It's kind of us going, hey, we exist too, and theology isn't neutral. The way we understand evil and goodness and God and spirit and how the world works, all of that is related to the experience that you have on this planet, is related to how people react to you, your circumstance has been living in this world. And that's what womanist theology helps us wrestle with. It says there is a starting point for your theology, whether you know it or not. You are coming from what you know and understand and have experienced. And we're just going to be honest about that. I come from a particular perspective as a Black woman who is on the bottom of society. And so, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's a good thing to acknowledge where you come from, and that impacts how you see the world and how you experience all of these things that we can talk about in the theoretical. Actually, we're experiencing it in real life. And if your understanding and experience of God isn't wrapped up in that, then what is it worth? Right. So it felt good not to have to somehow have this spirituality that was outside of my body. It got to be thoroughly linked into who I am, integrated into who I am. And so it just answered questions for me and gave me a way to talk about all of these things that were deeply personal, but also could still be explained in very particular ways, So, and there's a whole stream of like womanist scholars before it became a part of theology, right? Like, both Black feminists and womanists like Alice Walker would be considered a womanist. She um, kind of came up with the first definition, one of the first definitions of womanism. And I'm a huge Alice Walker fan. Um, Bell Hooks is more of a black feminist, Audre Lorde, but they would sort of, depending on who you ask, be considered part of that canon of womanist theology, or not womanist theology, but womanism,
Mm-hmm.
that then deeply influenced womanist theology.
Thank you, thank you. I'm learning, and because
Yeah.
I just had a conversation with a friend of mine, and until you because people, especially now on YouTube, scholars pop up, the word feminist is always associated to something negative. Um,
Right? Sure.
and I had a conversation with a friend of mine who used the term woke in a negative sense. I said, you
Yeah.
have to be very careful because people love to just kind of make a caricature of people's ideology and then create this straw man argument
Yeah.
um, against that. So I really appreciate you sharing. I read you offer healing and resilience building practices for all people with
Yeah.
special attunement to Black and Indigenous people and other people of color, people of the global majority, and LGBTQ people. What are some examples of the special needs? Let's start with Black and Indigenous people when it comes to healing under the effects of white supremacy.
Yeah. I mean, I've done a lot of study and meditation around um, this idea of hush harbors. Are you familiar with the hush harbors or
No.
brush harbors? Sometimes they were called. And then I have this whole like the lineage that has come down because I've done a lot of work around kind of healing and resilience building in our movement spaces and our social change spaces. Um, so brush harbors, hush harbors were these kind of secret gathering spaces for Black folks,
Mm.
enslaved folks, um, that where they would go out into the woods. That's why it's sometimes called a brush harbor, because it was like the brush, the trees would meet and cover and create kind of a chapel
Okay.
in the
Okay.
wilderness.
Yeah.
They didn't always have to be in that kind of enclosure. Like the idea is more important than the physical structure, but they were often kind of makeshift spiritual and resistance spaces. Um, and Rosemary Freeney Harding and Rachel Harding write about this in their book Remnants. They like really kind of briefly mention it as part of their family's history and kind of how that kind of Black folk religion became a part of their heritage. But it's something that has been documented over and over again in as a part of the Black experience in America. So it became a space where people could really just be outside of the white gaze. And so I think that is that's an example of it, is like providing spaces where uh non-white people can speak freely, can
Mm.
be freely,
Mhm.
um can dance and sing and laugh and have the inside jokes. And not that we're all the same. I mean, there are definitely regional things that are different culturally, family things, right? Like, you know just something do your people eat spaghetti and catfish?
No.
Okay, so that's like a Black thing in certain parts of the country, is like spaghetti and catfish, or some kind of, usually like a whitefish. I didn't grow up with that,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
that's like a Black food to a lot of people, right? So like being able to eat that without people being like, that's weird, right? So creating those spaces that at least honor it, even if we don't share it, right? I can be in a space with, Latinx folks, and I might not understand, like I might not eat the same food. I don't know how to make tamales, but I'm like, I love your tamales. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
Um, so it's those kinds of spaces, I think, where we can breathe a little bit and be together
Hmm.
and have some
Hmm.
in-house conversations.
Hmm.
So sometimes it's just as simple as providing that, having a healing circle where people can just be, um, all the way to like very formal, like programmatic kind of things, where we're going through a meditation or a somatic practice, or even my work with the Enneagram. I work with everybody with the Enneagram, of course, and I think there can be both a trepidation with Black folks and other people of color and even queer folks of like, is this a white thing?
Mm-hmm.
Is this
Mm-hmm.
you know, is this for me? Because I'm not sure. Um, is this putting me in another box, telling me who I can and can't be?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, but we often don't get the time to like do inner work, because just systematically we're poorer and we have to work more and we things like that. So to or we have to work harder to be to get ahead and those kind of things.
Absolutely.
So like having time to just focus on who we are, to understand ourselves better and to see our own full humanity, um and to be better in our relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I see that as like as a way of creating healing and growth for marginalized people that aren't always afforded that opportunity.
I'll take that question even to we talked about Black folks and people of color. What are some of the special needs of members of the LGBTQ community that the mainstream community may miss?
Yeah. I mean, similar in that it's like, not always having the ability to do that work because of the marginalization you face. And dealing with stereotypes, that you're not allowed to be the fullness of who you are. Um, and, uh, you know, especially in a work environment, do I say that I'm queer? Do I not? I mean, I was married to a man for 20 years, and my partner now is a woman. And I've been partnered with a non-binary person. I had what a lot of people would call like a later in life coming out. But that we could spend a whole hour on that whole thing. But I think, now I even notice how if I'm talking to somebody at work, or if I'm talking to an external person that I'm working with at work, when I'm like, oh, my partner, and I'm going to talk about her, and I'm like, I have a little catch of like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I'm going to cross a threshold when I say her,
Yeah.
because I'm a very femme presenting person. People do not assume I'm queer. And is this now going to be a thing? Are they going to have some weirdness because they now realize that I'm talking about a partner who's not a man? Um, and so like creating spaces, or even just being that person that somebody knows I'm not going to bat an eye when they talk about their partner, or um, being able to freely be their full selves with a coach or with me as a facilitator. Not saying that I get things right all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but I think people need, you asked about what those special needs are. Like, I don't know that it's special. I think it's the same needs that everybody else has, is to like be able to exist as a full human being, and to be able to fully participate in whatever is happening, right? Not have to hold parts of yourself back for your own safety. And so I try to be the kind of facilitator, coach, teacher, practitioner who people can show up as their full selves, and then really be able to come forward and participate fully, knowing that I might still get something wrong, but that they can also trust me to be the kind of person who can learn and correct and try again and be sincere in those tries.
Makes sense. Thank you. And you brought up the Enneagram. How did you come to discover the Enneagram, and what was your first impression of it?
Well, I came to the Enneagram like many people come to it these days, it seems, through the progressive Christian world.
Hmm.
And so as I was kind of having spiritual transition, some people would call it deconstruction, coming out of the evangelical church, and pretty conservative uh, Christian worlds into more progressive Christian circles. And multi faith circles. I started hearing all these people talking about the Enneagram. Well, what's your Enneagram type? Well, what's your, everybody talking about the Enneagram. I'm like, I don't know what y'all are talking about. And then, of course, going to seminary, and that becomes one of the things that, one of the personality assessments that you do that
Okay.
first year, and, in a class or two. And so I was told by friends before I got to seminary, because I don't know if we did another assessment. At that point, all of my friends were telling me that I was an 8.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, sure. And I hadn't really done research. I mean, because I think what happens to a lot of people is if you learn it in that context and your friends all tell you you're something, then you go to books and you read about that type.
Yeah. Yeah.
You don't really read about all the
Mhm.
types. You're like, let me
Yeah.
read about mine. And there are enough things that will ping, I think, especially if you're in kind of the right area. Like everybody thought I was an 8 because Black woman,
Yeah.
justice focused. Um, I pretty much walk in a room and people notice, like, I'm a pretty assertive, gregarious, extroverted person.
Mhm.
Um, like the pandemic has changed me, but before that, even more so, just like loud, like I have a presence. And
Yeah.
so I think it made sense that people kind of outwardly would assume that was my type.
Hmm.
Um, and and so I didn't even question it. And when I went to seminary and we were talking about it, I was just like, oh yeah, I already know my type. And then I was reading Richard Rohr's book about the Enneagram. And, Richard is a 1.
Yes.
He wrote, when he writes about the 1, and when I read about the inner critic, I was like, oh, like I, it was like a life changing moment to know that not everyone had that experience
Wow. Wow.
of this constant ticker tape of what you've done wrong, what you could do better, what like the inner critic that's just steady and brutal. Because at that point I hadn't done a lot of work with the Enneagram. I was just still in that kind of identification of myself
Yeah.
phase.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that sealed it for me. I was like, oh, type 1. Yeah. Because people that were typing me from the outside, they didn't know about what was happening in my head. They didn't know I had that inner critic. And, sure, justice focused, but really focused on what's right and wrong. The ability to laser focus, see what's wrong, and immediately start thinking about solutions. Like, that's how I work.
Mhm.
Um, and a lot of even my draw to faith and religious things, and the spiritual was about the right way, being good, um, doing the right things in the world, being righteous. So I picked a religion because at the time as a teenager I actually researched different religions, and I was like, this one seems the most right. That's how I picked a religion, not because I had a spiritual experience. I wanted to make the right decision,
Wow. Wow.
and so it makes all kinds of sense that this girl was a type 1 up and down. And so it took me a while to get there, but it's that I know for sure, without a doubt, that that's my home type.
Yeah. I like that you stated about you know I guess people stereotype if you're an assertive Black woman, you must be an 8, you know.
Yeah.
And I spoke with Jessica Denise Dixon a little bit about
Yeah.
that. So that's interesting. Being a body type,
Yeah.
and let's talk about the connection of dance and movement when it comes to
Yeah.
healing from the trauma we face in life. I'm a type 5.
Okay.
Self-prayer is repressed, so movement is not naturally the thing.
Not your thing.
I can just kind of sit here and be a walking brain. But I love that you stated that on your website. Like, let's talk about the importance of that movement and dance in our healing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, dance has always been a big part of my life. Um, and it's so funny because, we're both in Mario's awareness to action course right now. And I don't know how far you've gotten in this next set of videos that we're working through, but he starts talking about the centers and how that they don't teach the centers. And I texted Creek and I was like, he is going to have to pry the centers from my cold, dead hands. Because I don't know about that. Because what I do find is that type ones find it difficult to understand how they are a body type. And I understand what, Mario teaches about not shoehorning our things into, there are some things that we teach about the Enneagram that sometimes fall apart and we try to still fit them in. So maybe that's his point with the centers, but I'm just like, now I totally understand how type ones are body types. But I often run up against this if I'm in groups with ones, they'll be like, how are we body types? I don't understand. Because I think what we experience, because we're so desperately trying to repress our bodies in order to make them good.
Yeah.
And there's so much distrust of our bodies where our bodies are really trying to show us what's right and wrong. Like we know, in your body and your physical systems what's right and wrong before you can mentally, intellectually understand it.
Yeah.
But the pursuit of, trying to make the right thing come out before the wrong thing has a chance has us suppressing our bodies. But like when we can get in touch with that kind of survival brain that's like, oh, actually, you feel calm right now. So you're good. You're safe.
Mm-hmm.
Or there is an alarm right now. Is that alarm an alarm for right now? Or is that an alarm from your childhood and you're in a situation that reminds you of that? Right? Like that's survival stuff that our front brain is not yet getting into, and we have to like learn how to realign with it. That's how I understand it. And what for me movement does, whether it's dance, like I walk every morning, I really need to have physical activity in order to be okay. But something like dance, what it does for me, you can't really be dancing and thinking about other things because you'll fall over, you'll trip, you'll sprain your ankle. Like something will happen if you're trying to dance and you're trying to think about your taxes. Like,
yeah.
and so it pulls me out of this constant ruminating over what I've done right and wrong. And now, of course, dancers can be perfectionists. But I think that dance has taught me a lot over the years, and I have done all kinds of dance. I've been on dance team. I've coached dance teams. I've done a little bit of jazz, tap, ballet, all those kind of regular things. And I won a plus size pole competition in 2018.
Okay.
Yes. I'm certified in all kinds of like everything from I used to teach a dance class for like parents and babies called Salsa Babies. I am certified in different kinds of sensual dance. And what what it's taught me is it's not about the perfection of it. Like when I perform, when I compete, when I just dance with someone, and I have taught the wobble on 3 continents.
Okay.
Because I love the wobble, and I will
Yes.
always get in front
Yes.
and help people do the wobble. And I've taught it to 5th graders, and that was just as fun as being in, South Africa teaching people the wobble. Um, is that it's about the moment and the joy and the interaction. Nobody's going, oh well, you were supposed to hop back at this point. She didn't do that. Like
Mhm.
when I watch a performance, I do not care as much about their technical proficiency as I care about the joy. If they look terrified, there's no point in watching.
Yeah.
I want to see them having a good time.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can just walk across that stage if you're owning it and you look like you're having a good time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, a lot of people will say this phrase for a lot of things, but you'll hear this in dance: practice makes perfect. And first of all, that's not true. What you
Mm.
practice is what you're going to get. So practice makes possible.
Wow.
When when I practice a move, sometimes I practice it and I realize that's the wrong move.
Mm.
That's actually not what goes there. Let me do this. Sometimes what happens when I practice a move is that I do it exactly the way I wanted to do it.
Mhm.
And so I know it's possible for me to do it that way. It might not happen the next time, but now I know, wow, I can actually execute that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes it's something else entirely. It's close enough and it tells me what my body can do for that day. So practicing opens up possibilities. And that's one of the things that dance has taught me that, gets me out of the realm of it needing to be perfect.
Mm.
Just it becomes an exploration of possibility for me. And that gets me out of my type structure, which is helpful, because I can really, really like desire that perfection. I think it's going to unlock something for me,
Mm.
which the truth is it's the possibilities, the practice of it that opens up possibilities, that really unlocks such a bigger world. It unlocks all those possibilities for me.
I like that. I like how you name, because I'm very self-conscious when it comes to dancing and everything. Like I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I have no rhythm, right? But when I'm actually dancing, when I'm out of my head, yeah, it's a
Yeah.
freeing thing and everything. And then I'm just like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm out there doing that. But I like that. What you practice is possible. And
Yeah.
I just love that. I love that answer. I want to ask you, as we close out, I watched your message on revolutionary love, and I made the
Yeah.
mistake of watching it right before I walked into work because I was all kind of emotional walking in there. I love how you opened up at the end, because there's some internal conversations that we as Black people have to have.
Yeah.
And you talked about, and I hope you don't mind sharing,
Oh yeah.
growing up and not fully feeling accepted by your
Mm-hmm.
own people, by Black people, but being embraced by white people, and learning to love Black people after experiencing so much pain. This is a conversation that we don't generally talk about.
Yeah.
How did you find, and you made a joke like at that time, I know that was a few years back, like I've only been Black for you said 6 or 7 years at the time. I love that,
Yeah.
because sometimes we can be very narrow in our thinking and saying this is Black. If you don't act
Yeah.
a certain way, these narrow way of thinking. How did you find healing in, moving towards making that conscious effort to move towards loving Black people in light of the pain
Yeah.
you experienced?
Yeah. Well, what your question reminds me of is I had a conversation with some folks in my work the other day, um, about ways that we had evolved and changed. Um, and we have this weird cultural thing in America, at least, I don't know if this is, if this is in other countries. I think we have this weird cultural thing about like not changing your mind,
Mhm.
like this idea that somehow it's better to never change your mind. Um, and it might be, I don't know, influence of the like evangelical Christian church. I'm not sure exactly where it comes from. Maybe it comes from multiple sources, but like, and like politicians will say things like, he's a flip flopper, right? Like he's changed his
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah.
But we want people to change their minds. Like, in fact, you don't want someone to be the same person they were at 19 or 25 or 35. You want people to grow and change. When you get new information, you should actually change. Like,
Yes.
those
Yeah.
are good things.
Yes.
And it's okay to try out a way of thinking for a while and then go, actually, that's nope, or I'll keep this part and I'm going to give this part back. And I think that that is part of what shifted for me when it came to loving myself as a Black woman and loving Black people. Is there were things that I was given um, from my family, like my mother's mother, uh, Elizabeth Lovett, was the most bougie Black lady to ever. She's the definition of bougie, like in the dictionary. This woman was proud to pass the paper bag test. Okay, like loved being light skinned. Okay, loved it. Okay, and she would talk bad about Black people being Black. Like, oh, she's so dark. Oh, she's so fat. Like, she just did not like people. I don't know. She was very cranky.
Yeah.
Um, Also, I know her father suffered greatly because he was very light skinned and became a stepchild in a family where he was mercilessly teased for the color of his skin. And those kinds of things transfer down to children. So I don't know if that's where it came from for my grandmother, right? I never met that great grandparent, great grandfather. So um, that was something that was given to me, right? Is like this kind of middle class, firmly middle class, bougie Blackness. And like, you will go to college and you will do this and you associate with these kinds of people. And um, I had to then learn my own understanding of Black folks, right? And I had my own times when I had been, you know, handled roughly by other people that I had been told were supposed to love me. Schools are segregated still to this day.
Absolutely.
And so being in a school environment where it's like, why don't you hang out with the other Black kids? Okay. Like and going through that thing because the school is so segregated.
Yeah.
Um, and but then I started to understand what I needed. And there have been times where I've specifically cried and prayed and then got up and said, how am I going to I need Black women in my life. I went out and purposefully did what I needed to do to make friends with Black women. I need more Black men in my life. I went out and I'm going to try and find Black men. Like, I have done those kinds of things. And also, again, this is one of the ways that the deaths, the murders of Trayvon Martin, Mike Brown, and the countless others since then have changed my life. When Black Lives Matter surfaced as a movement, first in 2013, that first wave, and before with 2012, I think is when Trayvon Martin was murdered. That changed my life. But that also then cost me my marriage because I was married to a white man. My just obsession with loving Black people became very difficult on that relationship. And it was one of those things that it wasn't the only thing, but it was part of it. And so it has cost me a lot because I was no longer the safe Negro. Um, and I have capacity for some white people. And I'm, clear about other things that are important to me now. But, out of something so awful, it became a catalyst for how I, knew I would be interacting with Black people moving forward as a part of my own healing and loving myself, and learning to do that across class, because there's a big divide of Black people across class,
Absolutely.
um,
Yes.
and education and all of those things, right? And I continue to have ways to learn that. Now I am in love with someone who is from Detroit and is part of like very big working class, like uh, you know, different kind of Blackness than Southern Blackness that I've been like around for the past however many years. Like, so learning the differences, that it doesn't have to be a monolithic Blackness, and like how can we love each other and see ourselves in each other, and that only grows my love for all people. When I love myself and I love other Black people, all it does is grow my love for other people. So it doesn't become a, us only kind of thing. It doesn't entrench me in us versus them at all.
Yeah.
It only deepens my commitment to humanity, particularly because I'm, loving Blackness and loving Black people is like loving the people that are on the bottom of the, you know, on the caste system that we have in the US.
Absolutely.
You know, you could argue about kind of who's on the very bottom, Indigenous folks or Black folks, but like it's pretty, it's down at the bottom.
Yeah.
Both are gonna be down at the bottom. And
Absolutely.
so from there, that's how are able to build a love of all people. And so it just it continues to expand who I am, and it is who I am, and it's part of who I am politically, who I am in my work, um, and I think that's why so much of my work is about self compassion, and empathy for others, because um, when you learn to love like what the world tells you you're not supposed to love, then uh, it paves the way. Um, Bell Hooks said, "Love is always the place where I begin and end."
Mm.
Um, and I have that literally on a post-it note at my desk, so that I can look at that every day. And um, when I don't have when I don't have the intellectual argument, I don't have the facts, I don't have the, what I'm supposed to do next. Okay, I can begin with love, and wherever I have to end today, I can end with love, and that's good enough for me.
I love it. I love it. How can we learn more about your work as an Enneagram teacher, as a social justice or justice doula? I learned
Yeah,
that word. I heard that word, but I learned that word by the way.
good.
Yeah, how can we learn more about you and stay in contact with you?
Sure. I would love for people to be in contact with me. I do offer coaching, facilitation, teaching, writing, and public speaking. Um, and I have a website, MickyScottBeyJones.com. I'm the only Micky ScottBey Jones that exists. So it's easy to find me by Googling me. I have a YouTube channel, which, by the way, if you, Ahmad, have not seen my Type 5 panel, you should totally watch it. I would love your feedback on it. And any Type 5s, it's my most popular panel. Everyone, like, by leaps and bounds. I'm took like hundreds of views.
Okay,
And
okay.
I'm like, why does everybody need, everybody's trying to find out about Type 5s, you little mysteries, you. And so I'm like, don't know what, no, nobody want to learn about nines. They're like, ooh, tell me about the five. Um,
Yeah.
but I am going to be trying to finish that series off because I don't have every number yet. So people can totally email me from my website if you're interested in being on a panel. That would be great. The ones that I don't have, so check out the ones I have. And if you're a type that I haven't done a panel with yet, I would love for people to volunteer to be on my panel. Um, And I'll be probably recording those before the end of the year, before we hit 2024, because I want to have those out. And there's lots of stuff on my YouTube channel, so I would love for people to check that out. Lots of free resources. I have short type videos on each type. They're about 10 to 12 minutes long. And I do have a newsletter, so you can go to my website, hit the little button that looks like a link. And if you do that in the month of November and December and let me know that you're doing it, you can shoot me a quick email. I will send you a compassion meditation for free. And that's a short meditation practice that I developed based on the work of Rosemary Freeney Harding that I mentioned earlier, from the book Remnants. And it really is about kind of building compassion, particularly for somebody that we might have difficulty with. And so I developed this compassion practice for myself because I needed it. And I share it with folks. So it's not on my YouTube channel right now. You have to email me to get this. So you have to sign up for my newsletter and let me know you signed up, and then email me and I will send you that compassion meditation. So yeah, that's what I have going on. And I would love to connect with people. If you're looking for a coach or a facilitator, or just want to talk Enneagram or coaching in general, then I'm your girl. Hit me up.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for coming on. I just find you intriguing. And I could have probably spent 30 minutes on each question to go deeper and to kind of discipline myself to to move along. So thank you so much. This is Totem Confidence Podcast. I am Ahmad Wazir. And we want to thank our special guest, Micky ScottBey Jones. I'm amazed that I can say your name in one breath. I'm so afraid I'm going to butcher your name. But,
you got it great. You did great.
Thank you so much. It's Totem Confidence Podcast. Thank y'all for listening. We'll be back next week.